Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from the Royal College of Pathologists. That's all about the portfolio pathway in cellular pathology specialties, mostly histopathology. I'm Ronan McMullan. I'm the Clinical Director of Training and Assessment at the College, and I'm joined today by the Dream Team, who are going to tell you everything that you need to know about the portfolio pathway. And you can see on the screen here we've got lots of people, and so I'll briefly introduce them. But before I do, I just want to clarify that today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to look at it when it's put on the college website in a few weeks. And of course, you don't need to be concerned that anyone's going to be able to see you or know that you're at this webinar. Whenever it's recorded and put on the website, it will not be possible to identify any of you, any of the participants in that recording. So with us today, we have Professor Marta Cohen, who is the Vice President for Learning at the Royal College of Pathologists. We have Dr. Clair Evans and Dr. Sonal Kulkarni, who are the co-chairs of our credentials panel, this panel is the assessors who review all of the portfolio pathway applications that the college receives. We have Faye Macdonald from the specialist applications team at the GMC. We also have Jenny Maginley, Louis Nyerere and Joanne Brinklow, who are from the learning team at the college, who oversees the portfolio applications that come to us. And you're going to hear from most of these people today, but not all. So I'll introduce them one at a time as they come up. Our speakers bring lots of perspectives on the portfolio pathway, and so they have lots of information and advice for you. And what I'd say is, please don't be shy about asking questions. You should take advantage of the expertise that our speakers have, and after each speaker, we will have some questions. We'll have some time for questions for that speaker, and we'll have some more time for general questions at the end. So please type any questions you have into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, so that we can gather up questions and get them to the speakers as soon as we can. And like I say, don't be shy. If you have a question in your mind, the chances are someone else has a similar question that they would like to have answered too. So we should get on with today's webinar then. And our first speaker is Faye Macdonald, who is the Specialist Applications Manager for Portfolio Pathway at the General Medical Council. So I'll hand over to Faye. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ronan. I'm just going to share some slides with the group as well. So just give me 2 ticks to pull that up. So I just want to check that that's sharing okay with everybody. And that should be visible for you now.
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks, Ronan. Morning, everybody. Thanks so much for inviting us here today. As mentioned, my name's Faye Macdonald, and I am responsible for managing the team at the GMC who process portfolio applications. So I'm going to take you through the process in a bit more detail today. So the idea through my presentation is to help you understand what a portfolio application is, explore what makes a good quality application, and understand the kind of process and time frames that there are in the application. I know that there's going to be more detailed content throughout the session today around the curriculum and evidence, so I won't duplicate that. So I will give you a kind of insight into what that process looks like and some of the practicalities in making a good quality application. So I always we do a number of these events, and I always tend to touch on the legislation that underpins the portfolio pathway for a couple of reasons, really. And that's largely because the legislation does have a direct impact in the way that we process applications and some of the information that we're asking for as part of those applications. So the GMC's main legal powers for maintaining the specialist and GP registers are drawn from the Medical Act, but there's a suite of subordinate legislation that underpins that and sets out how we carry out those powers in a range of different legislation, which I've highlighted on here. The postgraduate medical education and training audit is kind of one of the key pieces of legislation that underpins the portfolio pathway, and that was updated in 2022 and came into effect at the end of 2023 with some changes to the PMET order. So talking about portfolio pathway in a bit more detail. So the portfolio pathway enables entry onto the specialist and GP register, although I'll focus on the specialist register today for the specialties. And it's a route for those individuals who haven't followed a full UK training programme or don't hold another entry point onto the registers via alternative mechanisms. And as part of the application, you're required to demonstrate that you have the knowledge, skills, and experience of an eligible specialist in the UK. And in practice, what that means is we have a framework for assessment of the high-level learning outcomes set out in the CCT curriculum. So in this case, histopathology and the other specialties. It's very much an evidence-based application process. So what we're asking you to do is provide a range of evidence to support that you meet the outcomes that are set out in the relevant curriculum. And you'll be asked to provide those within GMC Online and upload those, and I'll talk you through what that looks like as a process. What the portfolio pathway is it's not an assessment of competency in your current role. So you'll all be performing wonderfully in your current roles, but what we need from you is that range of evidence that's robust and objective to demonstrate you meet the outcomes in the curriculum. And whilst comments from colleagues are helpful as part of your application, the application isn't based solely on recommendations from colleagues. We do need to see that objective primary evidence of what you've done and how well you've performed in order to be able to see that you meet the outcomes in the curriculum. We've seen an increase in the number of portfolio applications pretty consistently over the last few years, with a considerable spike in the last 2 to 3 years. We know the reasons for those spikes, and that's largely around transitions to new curricula, where we dual rank curriculum and allowed individuals to apply against either the old or the new version for a period of time. We also introduced the requirements of knowledge, skills and experience in line with that legislation change towards the end of 2023. However, we do feel there's a general trend in terms of the number of applications, and the level that we're at the moment is probably likely to be maintained in terms of numbers. Just looking at histopathology specifically, the numbers have definitely reflected the more general trend from 2022 onwards. And overall, pathology specialties make up about 8% of the applications we receive, with histopathology being the highest in that group of pathology specialties. So that's just to kind of give you an indication of where the specialties sit in terms of what my team are processing. So diving into the application in a little bit more detail. So there are some minimum eligibility requirements in order to even be able to make an application. And again, these are drawn from that legislation I referenced on one of the first slides. So to be eligible to make an application in histopathology, you need to have a specialist medical qualification in histopathology or have completed 6 months continuous training in histopathology. That can be drawn from anywhere in the world, and it can be from any point in your career history. And it's simply for the eligibility purposes to apply. You will then need to provide a further range of evidence to demonstrate that you meet the learning outcomes as part of the application. And we will need to see evidence of this within your application. So you'll need to upload either the qualification itself or evidence of that training in order to be able to progress your application. There's some really important information to look at before you even start gathering your evidence or make an application. So it's really important that you read the specialty specific guidance for the specialty and the curriculum. So I'll refer to the specialty specific guidance as the SSG, and we have an SSG for every specialty where we've got a CCT curriculum, and we've drafted those in conjunction with the Royal Colleges and faculties to tell you the kind of types of evidence that you should provide in order to show us you meet the outcomes in the curriculum. So it absolutely is a linchpin document for you, and the college have put a huge amount of time and effort into developing that guidance with us so that we can give you the best advice that we can. We ask that you don't duplicate evidence. There is the functionality within the system and within your application to cross-reference your evidence if you feel it's relevant to more than one of the learning outcomes in the curriculum. And there absolutely will be evidence that aligns with that. So it's really important you don't provide the same piece of evidence more than once. That just makes it a lot harder for us and your evaluators to kind of identify your evidence and that you've met the learning outcomes. It's really important to make sure your evidence is relevant and sufficiently recent. So again, that SSG document outlines all of that for you. And it's really important that what you're providing is relevant to those learning outcomes in the curriculum. It's very important to make sure all of your evidence is anonymised, and I'll touch on the requirements for this that we have in your application in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. But essentially, we cannot accept anything that's not anonymised or redacted in line with our guidance under data protection regulations. So it's really important that you try and get that right first time, because it can cause delays throughout the application process for you. And you will be asked to nominate a series of referees and verifiers as part of your application. It's really good practice to speak to those people before you do that, because we will be reaching out to them directly as part of the application process, and they need to be available for a period of time after you've submitted your application. And again, that can be one of the things that causes delays in us being able to progress your application. Just touching on the curriculum for histopathology. So the curriculum's been developed by the college and is divided into 11 learning outcomes or capabilities in practice, or SIPs. And what they do is describe the professional tasks and work within the scope of histopathology. But each learning outcome has a set of descriptors, and those are designed to help trainees recognise the minimum level of knowledge, skills and attitudes to be demonstrated. And I know that you're going to get some talks today that give a bit more detail around these elements from the experts. But you basically need to demonstrate that you're capable of unsupervised practice in all of those learning outcomes. And those are split into 7 generic learning outcomes and 4 specialty ones. And as I said, you'll get some more detail around that from the experts today. So in terms of actually making an application via the portfolio pathway, all of the applications are made via GMC Online, and you'll need to check what the current fee is at the point you actually submit your application, and that's available on our website. But all of your evidence is uploaded electronically, and we do have a full user guide on our website which takes you through the application process step by step and gives you screen guides of what that looks like in GMC Online, just to familiarise yourself with that. But essentially, you can upload your evidence over a period of 24 months, so you can use it as an electronic portfolio up until the point you submit your application. The evidence that you supply needs to be readable. It needs to be in an appropriate format and easy for us to understand. You need to make sure that you group different types of evidence together where possible, and the documents you upload need to have an appropriate title, and they need to match the verification proforma that we ask you to provide to attest to the evidence. We do accept a range of file types, but we would always recommend you use PDF, because that's the easiest and most readable format for us to see your evidence. So in terms of the evidence that you're going to supply, as I mentioned, we want to see a range of evidence from you, and that's detailed and defined in your SSG. So you organise your evidence electronically in the system by the curriculum learning outcomes. So there will be a section for each of the capabilities in practice within the curriculum for you to supply evidence, and advice on the evidence you should put within that section in the application, and that mirrors your specialty specific guidance. So those two things can be read in conjunction with each other. We ask that you provide a mix of primary and secondary evidence, and some examples have been listed on the slide, but again, your SSG is a linchpin document in describing what you need to provide within the different SIPs. We ask that you provide no more than 150 uploads, albeit your evidence body may make up around 800 to 1,000 pages of evidence. And we ask that you ensure again that your evidence is relevant and sufficiently recent. So evidence from up to the last 10 years will be accepted, albeit you will need to show that you're maintaining your competence over that period. Just a note on the CV you need to provide as part of a portfolio application. So we do ask that you create a specific CV for this application. And the reason for that is because it acts as a really helpful kind of background document for us to navigate the evidence, and for your evaluators to navigate the evidence and see kind of where that fits in your career history. So it's really important that it's up to date and provided in the GMC format that we provide. And again, that's listed on our website, and there's a structure on the website for you to use. It needs to match all of the information you actually put in your online application as well. And we ask that you provide all of your employment history since graduation. So we ask you to provide all of your postgraduate experience since your primary medical qualification. Start with the most recent and work backwards. We do ask that you detail any gaps in your employment that are over 28 days. It's not a problem if there are gaps in your employment. We just need to see the reason for that. And then we do ask for further detail on some of the elements I've highlighted on this slide. So again, it's quite a unique CV for you to provide in that sense, and we do ask that you follow the format. Again, this is one of the really common areas where we can have a bit of back and forth with individuals in the application, and that can just cause delays for you in terms of processing. So we will obtain what we call structured reports as part of your application, and you'll be asked to nominate some referees within your application. So we ask you to nominate a series of referees which is relevant for your specialty. So in histopathology, we ask that you nominate 4 to 6 referees, one of whom is your clinical director or lead from the last 12 months, 2 practicing consultants in histopathology, and there's also one from your most recent educational supervisor if you've been in training for the last 5 years. And these are all defined in your SSG, again, in more detail. If you've worked within a very small clinical team, for example, more recently, so it's not possible for you to obtain 2 referees who are practicing in the specialty, we'll want you to explain that within your application and seek a reference from a consultant in the specialty who you've worked with directly in the last 12 months of clinical practice, and a second consultant who you've worked with in the last 3 years, for example. So you might be able to draw some evidence from slightly longer in terms of that referee. And these structured reports are obtained directly by my team based on the people you have nominated within your application, and we'll contact them directly on the details that you've provided. So the reports that they provide are used to triangulate the primary evidence, and the form that we share with them is mapped against the learning outcomes in the curriculum. So it's really good practice to speak with your referees beforehand to obtain their permission for nominating them and let them know what's expected from them, because they're going to need to be able to comment on your current and recent practice and the range of practice that you've demonstrated in line with those learning outcomes in the curriculum. So a more detailed report is much more helpful for your evaluators. When we request the reports, we do this at the point your application is assigned to an advisor in our team, and we ask those reports to be returned to us within 21 days. We will also actively chase those reports for a further 21 days. But if at that point we've not received a report from one of your referees, we'll let you know and ask you to contact them or nominate somebody else. Again, this is why it's really good practice to speak to individuals who you're nominating beforehand, because it can cause delays within your application process if we're not getting responses from those people. So as part of you uploading your evidence electronically within GMC Online, we only ask you to provide copies of documents. So those copies need to be verified or authenticated so that we can be assured they're an accurate reflection of your practice. So a very small number of documents will need authentication, and those we do actually need to see in hard copy from you and a copy uploaded within your application. So the only evidence that you need to authenticate is qualifications from outside of the UK that you're providing in your application. And what I mean by authentication is that a solicitor or the awarding body has signed and stamped a copy of your certificate certifying that they've seen the original. Sometimes that's called a certified copy. And as I said, it's a very small number of documents that would need authentication in your application. Any evidence that doesn't meet the requirements of authentication or verification, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide, we can't accept and we can't submit it for evaluation. So it's really important you get it right first time. And we've got, again, guidance on our website to articulate the different steps you need to take when doing this. The majority of your evidence will need to be verified in line with our guidance. So in terms of how you get that evidence verified, we have a process whereby you need to identify a verifier from each hospital or institution that you're providing evidence from. So, for example, if you've worked in 3 hospitals in the last 10 years, you would need to identify a verifier from each of those hospitals who will attest to any evidence from that institution or hospital that you've worked at, and they will attest to all of the evidence. We ask that those individuals are in a medical supervisory position, and the reason for that is because they can access the relevant records for the institution to be able to attest that the evidence that you're providing. Once you've identified a verifier, we ask you to complete the proforma that's available on our website. And this is a Word document where you will list the evidence that you're supplying, the type of evidence, the title that you're giving that evidence within your application, the number of pages that is, and you'll list all of that for the individual verifier to check. You will then send that proforma to the verifier you've nominated, and you will get them to check your evidence against the relevant systems and records and attest to that in the proforma. So they will attest to the proforma, and that's all done electronically, so you don't need to get them to sign it physically, and they can attest to that electronically in the form and pop their name at the declaration at the end. And they will provide their contact details and GMC number if GMC registered, so that we can contact them as part of the application and so that we can see they've attested to that evidence. Once the verifier has done that, you will submit the completed proforma in your application along with the evidence that you've supplied. And then what we will do as part of the application process is conduct primary source verification, or PSV, using the information you've provided. So we contact all of your verifiers and check that they have attested to the evidence, and we also send them some of the evidence that you've provided to check that that is actually an accurate reflection of what they attested to. Some kind of do's and don'ts around the proforma. So it's really important that you match the document description with the title of the document you've put in your application and uploaded within your application, including the document type and putting specific dates and page numbers on there. The reason that's really important is we need to be able to cross-reference the information in your proforma with the evidence that you've uploaded. So if we can't see that something's listed on a proforma, we won't be able to accept it because we will assume it's not been verified. So that's why it's really important to get it right first time. We ask that where possible, you don't provide more than one proforma or verifier per hospital or institution. This causes quite significant delays in applications, and you only need one individual to attest to that information for you. Again, be specific about your descriptions in documents and don't give vague descriptions or broad date range and collective page numbers. That makes it really hard for us to cross-reference the information, and again can cause significant delays in your application. There are some documents that don't require verification or authentication because, for example, they're self-produced or in the public domain, and those are listed on our website. But you don't need to verify or get authenticated your CV, any 360 or multi-source feedback, any CPD that you've completed, publications in the public domain, or any kind of reflective diaries. So just touching on anonymisation of evidence or redaction in a little bit more detail. Again, this is really, really important as part of the application process. In line with the general data protection regulations, we cannot hold any data on our systems that doesn't align with our guidance. So we will need to delete that from our systems, and you would have to anonymise it again and re-upload it if it hasn't been done correctly. So given you're uploading evidence electronically, it's really important that the information is permanently redacted to make sure that we can't see any of the data that's in there that we shouldn't hold. So the most effective way to ensure that is perhaps by using Adobe redaction software or another type of redaction software to ensure, or saving your documents as PDFs where you've redacted them to make sure that that redaction's locked in. But all patient identifiable information needs to be removed, other than gender and date of birth, which can be helpful in terms of looking at range of patients. Trainees that you've assessed, their names and details also need to be removed. It's fine for colleague data to remain, except where an individual's been involved in complaints and you need to remove their details on that basis. So I'm going to talk about the application process itself in a little bit more detail. And this initial slide is just to give a bit of an overview of the overall timeframes in the application, albeit I'm going to break those stages down in a bit more detail over the following slides. So just to kind of give you a feel for the timeframes of an application upon submission. So we know that individuals spend a couple of years preparing for an application before they submit generally. But at the point you actually submit your application, it does take about 6 to 9 months for you to receive a decision on that application. So it's really important you don't look to take up or apply for any roles until you've received that outcome from us. So in terms of the stages of the application in a bit more detail, the first stage when you submit your application is our kind of initial assessment of that. Once your application is received, we will do an initial triage of your application to ensure that the core requirements of the application have been met. So those are your eligibility to apply that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So we will check that you're eligible to make an application and that you've provided evidence of that within your application. We'll check that you've provided performers that verify the evidence within your application, and those have been completed in full. And whether that broadly looks like what we would expect to see, and that you've nominated appropriate referees within your application as well. We do all of those initial checks as part of a triage within a couple of weeks of your application being submitted. And if there are any issues with one of those things, we will come back to you to look to rectify those before we can assign your application to an advisor. And we won't assign your application to an advisor until we've rectified any of those issues and are assured around them. Once we're satisfied with those kind of core elements, your application gets assigned to an advisor and they will introduce themselves and be your main point of contact throughout the progress of your application. The team are really knowledgeable and experienced in processing portfolio applications, so it's really worth taking their advice on board. And they are utilising that SSG and the information within the SSG to give you advice on the evidence you should supply. And they will do a further eligibility check on your application in full and check that the information is attested to. They will also request the structured reports from your referees at this point. And they will reach out to your verifiers with a Pathfinder email, is what we call it, to check that they're acting as a verifier in your application and they signed the proforma that you've provided in your application. So they will go through and they will check all of those sections within your application. It's really important to note that progression of your application very much depends on the kind of quality of evidence, your engagement in the process, and our advice. So some of the things that I've mentioned throughout this presentation are aspects where we can see delays. So again, it's really important to try and get it right first time. The second stage of the application is our more comprehensive review of the evidence that you've supplied. So your assigned advisor will work through each piece of evidence that you've provided. They'll check it against the performers and ensure that it's been verified appropriately. And they'll work through your evidence and either accept it or not accept it in line with our guidance and the SSG. So what they will do is they'll create a checklist for you in GMC Online, which will help identify any gaps in the evidence, any anonymisation issues, etc., that mean we can't accept the evidence. And we'll tell you which evidence we have been able to accept and is contributing towards your application. And they will provide you with advice and guidance in line with the curriculum and SSG. And what they will do is create that checklist for you within 30 days of your application being received and share that with you in GMC Online. So you can see exactly which documents have been accepted, which haven't, and the overall advice for you in your application. At the point the checklist is sent to you in GMC Online, you then have a further 60 days in which to gather any further evidence or rectify any of the evidence or information within your application. You can edit the application in GMC Online at this point, add comments, submit further documents, remove documents and resubmit them. So it gives you the opportunity to do that within the system. And at the point that 60-day period is up, or when you feel your application is ready, we move on to the final stage of your application, and we consider your application closed at that point. So at the point we consider your application closed, what we will do is we will do our final primary source verification of your evidence, and we will contact your verifiers again and share the evidence with them that you've supplied, again, to check it's an accurate reflection of what they attested to and your practice. And we will also collate the information in your application and prepare it for evaluation by the Royal College. So that's what we'll do at this end stage. And once we've received successful responses from your verifiers and collated that information, we will then submit the application for evaluation to the Royal College. And it's at that point that the GMC is subject to a 3-month legal deadline in which to issue you with a decision. We have 2 independent evaluators or a panel or a committee who consider every single application, and the Royal College will manage that process as described earlier. And what we then do is we undertake a quality assurance review of the evaluation and recommendation provided by the Royal College within that 3-month time frame. So we'll receive a recommendation from the Royal College on whether you should be entered onto the specialist register or not and have met the learning outcomes within the curriculum. We will complete some quality assurance checks of the evaluation to ensure that you've been assessed against the correct standards, all of the evidence has been considered, the evaluation's fair and objective. And if we need to make any clarifications or queries, we'll do that within that time period of QA. And then what we do is the GMC issues a decision based on the Royal College and faculty recommendation, and therefore any kind of subsequent appeal or challenge to that decision is made with the GMC. Just to share some success rates in histopathology over the last few years. So as you can see, there's a trend of an increase in terms of success rate in the specialty, which is really positive. And across all specialties for 2024, the success rate was 67%, sorry, with the initial application success rate being 56%. That was actually a 6% rise from the previous year, and it has risen year on year over the last 3 years. So really, really positive. But I think it's always really important to note that whilst these success rates are interesting and helpful, they're not an indicator of your likelihood to succeed. Your success will very much depend on your past training and experience and the evidence that you are able to provide of that, because your application decision is solely based on the evidence supplied within your application, rather than any assumption about what you might have done. Also, your willingness to engage in the process, comments from referees can also have a bearing on your application. In terms of getting your decision, if you're successful, you'll be granted specialist registration, and we'll send you a copy of the evaluation that's been drafted by the Royal College and faculty and us, and we'll send that to you. If you're unsuccessful, we'll send you a letter confirming that you've not been successful, which outlines your options. And we'll also send you a copy of the evaluation form again against the different learning outcomes in the curriculum, which detail how your evidence has been evaluated. If you're unsuccessful, though, your evaluation form will contain a series of structured recommendations which should help you in a future application and identify the area of the curriculum or the learning outcome where you haven't provided sufficient evidence and what we recommend you provide in a future application to show that you meet those requirements. So you have 2 options if you're unsuccessful. The first of those is to submit a review application within 12 months of the decision on your initial application. And that's where you can apply on the basis of providing additional evidence to meet the recommendations, or if you feel there's been a procedural error in the way we've processed your application. We ask that you make that application within 12 months because you're only providing evidence to meet the outstanding recommendations. So it allows us to be assured around the relevance of the evidence you did supply in your first application to meet the learning outcomes. Alternatively, you can choose to appeal the GMC's decision not to include you on the specialist register, and that's managed by an independent team within the GMC rather than my area. But just to touch on review application success rates, so the majority of applicants do go on to review if they're unsuccessful, and almost all of them are successful in that application, as you can see from this slide. So for the last 3 years, running 100% of review applications have been successful in histopathology. So it is really worthwhile if you get those structured recommendations going on to review, because the likelihood is that you will succeed at that point. And then finally, just to kind of highlight, we have a really broad range of information on our website, and the links provided here. And we also have a dedicated email address for portfolio applicants. And I would really recommend you engage with the guidance on our website or reach out to the team before you make an application if you have any questions. So we have a dedicated advisor who's available each day to answer any pre-application queries that might have been received. So do reach out if you've got questions before you start an application. Again, it's better to get it right first time. And our contact centre colleagues are incredibly well versed in these applications and will be able to field any queries over the telephone or put you through to a member of my team who can answer a more specific or detailed query that you might have. So on that basis, I'm just going to stop sharing because that kind of concludes the end of my presentation. And I think that's stopped me sharing. I'll just double check.
We can still see your slides. Oh, that's you. It's fixed.
There we
now.
go. Took me a minute.
Thank you. So firstly, thank you very much, Faye, for giving us so much time this morning. We really appreciate you coming along to talk us through the GMC perspective on the portfolio pathway. It's really, really useful, so thank you. We have, you've sparked a lot of interest. As you can probably see, there are lots of questions. And as I'd said, lots of these questions have come through while you were speaking. So I feel as though some of them might already have been answered. And maybe we'll try to run through a number of them as quickly as possible, because they might be rapid fire. There's one that's not rapid fire. So there's a question about whether it would be possible to develop a system of accepting specialist medical qualifications the same way as some of your other colleagues in GMC do for primary medical qualifications. Is that something that you think is on the horizon?
So I hope I've understood the question correctly, is the way I would describe it. So we have launched last year our recognised specialist qualification pathway, and it's a new pathway. So obviously it's kind of, the idea is that it will grow over time. So at the moment, there's a small selection of general practice qualifications on the recognised specialist qualification pathway, which we accept, which is an alternative pathway to the portfolio pathway if you hold one of those qualifications. And that's where we have qualifications that we are assured map sufficiently against the learning outcomes of the relevant curriculum. In that, it's still early days, I think, for that pathway is probably the way I would describe that. And we hope it will grow and mature over time, but it's definitely one to watch and something obviously the GMC has looked to implement.
Great. So maybe at some point in the future, but not yet.
Yeah.
Okay. And so a few technical questions that you're probably very well placed to help us with, Faye. So can referees and verifiers be the same people, and how many are required?
Absolutely. Yeah. So absolutely, we see that really commonly in applications, that it is the same individual who acts in both of those capacities. It can be really helpful because they've got that kind of broader overview of your application more generally. But I would kind of manage their expectations of kind of the contact they're going to get from us, and the fact that they are going to need to complete a couple of different forms if they're going to step into those roles. So have a chat with them beforehand would be my advice. But yeah, it's no problem for those people to be the same people. And the referee requirements are described in detail in the SSG. I touched on them in the presentation, and you may have some specific queries around your practice and how that might and how you might obtain those individuals. And I think those will probably be supported in some of the discussions throughout the day today. But yes, they can be the same people essentially.
So they can be the same people providing they're up for it.
Yep.
Okay, great. So there's a question about time. How much time do applicants have to submit the application? Because of course, it takes quite a long time to gather all of the evidence.
Yes, so up to 24 months in the system before you submit. So you can create an application in GMC Online and keep that open for up to 24 months before you actually hit that submit button. You don't pay a fee until you submit the application. So, it is well worth doing. I would really recommend if you think you're kind of 12 to 18 months away, that's when you kind of kick on with that process and start gathering your evidence in the system. The average it usually takes individuals in the system is about 12 months because they're doing that kind of over a period of time. My advice is it's not something you can sit down and do in an afternoon or a day. You need to spend a bit of time gathering that over a period of weeks or months to make sure it's well organized, you've got everything you want in there, etc.
Yes, that sounds like good advice. So a couple of very quick questions here. Do we need to submit hard copies as well?
No, so we don't ask for any hard copy evidence other than your authenticated evidence, which, unless you hold a qualification from outside the UK, which you may well do, you don't need to provide anything in hard copy. We just ask for electronic copies of everything.
Okay. And thinking about authentication, there's a question here about authentication.
Mm-hmm.
Should this be done by the solicitor from the UK, or is it okay for a solicitor from the home country to do it?
Yeah, it's fine as from an overseas solicitor to conduct that as well. It just needs to be a solicitor or the awarding body that authenticates a qualification.
Great. And again, sorry for this. This really is rapid fire. Sorry.
You're all right, don't worry.
So we've got a question from a doctor who's GMC registered, but not yet on the specialist register, whose primary medical qualification certificate from outside the UK has previously been verified via Epic. And the question is, should they authenticate it again for
So
portfolio pathway?
no, so we wouldn't even ask to see your primary medical qualification if you are fully registered. So if you are already registered with the GMC and hold full registration and a license, you won't be asked for those documents again. So you will only need to focus on your specialist medical qualifications and evidence for the portfolio application.
Great. There's a question about referees. Can we select a referee from our training, which was a couple of years ago from our home country? I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that might be really relevant in terms of supporting your application.
Yep. And let me see. There's a little bit about the currency of evidence that I think we've talked about previously. So there are a few questions about how old evidence can be, and there's some acknowledgement that some evidence might come in that's 5 to 10 years old. And I know there's variation between specialties, but in the pathology specialties, we do accept evidence of up to 10 years old quite frequently.
Yeah, so there's real flexibility that the college have allowed within these specialties, which is really helpful, and it allows you to demonstrate that kind of ongoing practice over a longer period of time.
Thank you. And question about I think there are a couple of questions about redaction and anonymization of data. So there's a question here from someone who'd like to know whether the specimen numbers can be retained in the logbook. I think they can because they don't provide a clear link to the patient, but I don't know what.
Yeah, so any kind of unique identifier we would ask is removed because it's about whether the advice we've had from our information security and governance teams is around whether any information within the evidence that's being provided can be triangulated to link back to an individual. Okay. So that's the kind of premise. For my team, a specimen number is likely to look like a unique identifier. So you should be looking to anonymize that on that basis. So we would ask that you do that, but we will kind of work with you on that in the application.
Okay, so it sounds like that's good advice that I'd have got wrong. A question about redaction. Someone wants to know, can they do redaction by hand with a black marker rather than using software?
You absolutely can. So you can and then kind of upload and scan your evidence in. I mean, it is a little bit more time consuming, but appreciate you may actually have some hard copy information you're providing and kind of scanning in. You just need to make sure it's definitely not visible when you scan it in. Some scanners are really powerful and can kind of still pick that information up. We used to suggest that a black crayon is actually the best way to do it because that blocks out any of that light that a scanner would pick up on.
Great. Okay, so just continuing to get great value from you, Faye. There's a question about verifying evidence. So there's a question here about which institution should verify the evidence. For example, if you submitted your logbook to your college every year, is it the hospital you trained in or the college you submitted it to who should verify it? And they said, the same for coroner autopsy reports. Should that be the coroner or the local hospital?
Yeah, so ideally it should be the institution that you've undertaken that work at. So that's what our advice is. It needs to be the institution.
So ideally your local hospital rather than the college.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. There is a question about what's the difference between referee and verifiers, although I think you probably covered that in your talk at this point.
So I suppose they do different jobs in your application. Your verifier is attesting to the evidence and it being authentic and it being an accurate reflection of your practice, whereas your referee is commenting on how you demonstrate the learning outcomes in the curriculum within a structured report form.
Great, thank you for that. So there are a few questions that I think we might pick up later. So I don't want to duplicate or cross over between different different speakers. So there's a question here: is the CSER combined pathway available at this point?
So the combined programme, it's okay. It's okay. The combined programme isn't portfolio pathway. So the combined programme leads to the award of CCT, and that's where individuals enter the UK training programmes, usually at a higher level, with recognition of experience that's been gained outside of programme, and that contributes to demonstrating some of the learning outcomes. It's completely distinct from portfolio pathway and is managed by a competitive selection into training, etc. So that would be managed separately. The GMC then certify individuals who've completed the combined programme by awarding them a CCT.
Faye, thank you very much. I'm going to let you off the hook here because you worked very hard this morning.
No problem at all.
There are lots of questions that we haven't got to yet.
Sure.
And what we might do in the college is look through these questions, think about whether there are any important themes that we could provide some kind of written summaries of to clarify for potential applicants, and we might come back and just check some of those with you if that's okay.
Of course, no problem at all.
But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That was fantastic.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me. I hope the rest of the session goes well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. So, our next speakers are Joe Brinklow, who's the Director of Learning at the college, and Jenny Maginley, who's the Training Manager at the college. And so Joe and Jenny look after an area of the college which is responsible for portfolio pathway applications when they come to us from the GMC. So I will now hand over to Joe and Jenny if you're ready with your presentations.
I'll just, Ronan, if you can just confirm when you can see that in full.
Okay, so it's not in presentation format yet.
I know, he's thinking about it.
Oh, that's okay.
Is that okay?
That's it now. Perfect.
Lovely. Okay, great. Hi everyone, I can see we've got a huge amount of interest in this morning, so it's really good to see everybody here today, albeit virtually. As Ronan said, I'm Joe Brinklow, Director of Learning at the college. I'm going to do the first part of this presentation covering mainly about the curriculum, and then I'll hand over to Jenny, who will cover the last part of the presentation. So I'm sure you've probably all looked on the website and seen the curricula, but this is just really a run through and a reminder of our cellular pathology curricula and how they look for you. So these were updated and implemented in August 2021. As you can see, our brightly coloured covers along the bottom there. And they were made in relation to an update from the GMC around curriculum standards. And so the curricula that you're looking at now look quite different to the ones if you've seen previous versions of the histopathology curricula that have been published by the college previously. So there, in previous curricula, you will have seen that there were lots of competencies, lots of lists of things. And in the actual histopathology curriculum itself and the others, you will see just the high level outcomes. And I'm going to walk you through some specific examples in a moment. But just to be really clear, when you're looking at the curriculum, you might look at that and think, well, there's not much detail here. What else is it that I need to do? So the curriculum is accompanied now by a syllabus. We've split out that real detail, but the syllabus is also really important. One of the requirements of the GMC was that all colleges had to embed generic professional capabilities. And again, I'll come on to that again in a little bit and explain how that works in the new curriculum. And again, there's a bit of a shift away from requiring absolute numbers of things. So there are indicative numbers in the curriculum just to help everybody understand what it is we're looking for, but they are indicative. Alongside the curriculum, the workplace-based assessments changed as well, and they moved away from quite a summative approach where there were, again, sort of lists of different things with tick boxes alongside to supervised learning events, which really require much more feedback, lots of writing about how junior doctors are progressing in their training. And there has been independent reporting guidance alongside the histopathology curriculum in the past, but again, that was updated as well. So I mentioned the generic professional capabilities, and this is the framework that has been implemented by the GMC. And as I say, this is something that all colleges implemented in their curricula now. And you can see there are all the sorts of things there that you would expect a doctor to be able to demonstrate. So in terms of the actual histopathology curriculum itself, these are the high level outcomes. We call them SIPs, capabilities in practice, but they really describe what we're looking for from a histopathologist at the end of their training when they're preparing to become a consultant. And as you can see, there are 7 SIPs there on the top left-hand corner, and then 4 specialty SIPs on the bottom right-hand corner. And then this is just a further sort of drilling down, a further example for you of how we've put the curriculum together and how everything works in tandem. So this one is looking at SIP 8, looking around demonstration of leadership and management. And you'll see underneath that we've provided for each of the SIPs more detail about how trainees can demonstrate how they're working towards or how they've met that SIP. So these are examples. There may be others. There may be other ways to demonstrate that, but these are really there as a guide. In addition, for each SIP, we've also indicated the relevant generic professional capabilities that map to that SIP. So very clearly, just mapping back to that slide that I just showed you with the GPCs that have been outlined. And then underneath, some examples of evidence that trainees should provide when they're working towards their CCT. Now, it's really important to say at this point that Faye's already mentioned in her talk, and I know Jenny's going to come onto it in hers, that there is the specialty specific guidance for the portfolio pathway, and you will see in that we've taken these SIPs and we've gone into a lot of detail about the types of evidence that can be provided for you to demonstrate how you've met the SIP, bearing in mind that your training and experience may be varied, may have taken place in different locations, different countries. So it's really important to be aware of the curriculum and understand it, but also look at it in conjunction with the SSG. But I'm not gonna spoil Jenny's part of the talk. Just drawing on workplace-based assessment. So trainees are required to undertake workplace-based assessments throughout their training. And these are something that if you're preparing a portfolio pathway application, you can also use, you can access them and have them as part of the evidence to submit towards your portfolio pathway application. The requirements for them are in the back of the curriculum document. There are hard copy forms available on the college website, and they are integrated into the ePortfolio, the LEP system, which you can also access as a portfolio pathway applicant. So it's really just to demonstrate to you what the requirement is, and then if you want to have a look at those and think about how you might be able to undertake some of these to add evidence to your portfolio pathway application, that's absolutely fine, and everything should be there available for you to be able to do that. So I've mentioned the LEP system. That's our name for our ePortfolio, learning environment for pathology trainees. When we were updating our curricula, we also alongside that updated the LEP system so that it mapped to the new curriculum. There was obviously a very big change in the curriculum in 2021, and it was really important that the ePortfolio mirrored that. As I've said, the LEP system is available to anyone who's thinking about applying for the portfolio pathway. You can get access to it. There's a link here. These presentations will be made available to you afterwards, so you'll be able to go in and access the links. There's some very helpful links at the end of this presentation as well. And really, the earlier you start using the LEP system, if you're thinking about putting an application together, I think the easier it will be for you to map your knowledge, skills and experience against the curriculum requirements. It'll be much easier then when it comes to our assessors at the college, looking at what you've done, to really be able to clearly see how everything that you've done maps together. So it's not just about the workplace-based assessments. You can upload all types of evidence into the ePortfolio, and you can download all of that as well. So if you need to send it to the GMC, you will be able to do that. So really have a think about that. As I've said, though, there are quite a lot of resources that nonetheless are available on the college website, and you can make use of those as well. Finally, just a bit about the examination. We're very clear that portfolio pathway applicants must have evidence of FRCPath or an equally robust examination as the best way to demonstrate their knowledge. We haven't been able to define what the alternative evidence is that would be acceptable from doctors who have not passed an examination. So therefore, if you haven't passed a postgraduate examination in histopathology that is equivalent in standard to the FRCPath, then it is unlikely that your application will be accepted. There's a very clear section about that in the SSG. Sometimes we've had questions about how long after you've passed their Part 2 examination you should apply via the portfolio pathway. There is no guidance about that. Obviously, we've already sort of touched on the fact that we will accept evidence from the last 10 years, so that's worth thinking about. But the application isn't just about the qualification, about the postgraduate qualification. It's about demonstrating through your evidence that you've met all aspects of the requirements for histopathology. So you need to make sure that in addition to any evidence that you provide around postgraduate qualification or RCPath, you've got everything else covered as well. I think that brings me to the end of my bit. It certainly does. So I'm going to hand you over to Jenny, and Jenny, if you can just let me know when you want me to move the slides on.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Jo. Hi everyone, as you know, I'm Jenny Maginley. I am the training manager. I'm just going to give you a little breakdown of the portfolio pathway. You might have heard already some of this before, but I'm just going to reiterate. Successful portfolio pathway applicants can apply for substantive consultant posts in the UK. As Faye said in her presentation, applicants can take up to 24 months to collect all the evidence towards the application. So you've got plenty of time to gather all the evidence. You can apply for a portfolio pathway. To apply, you would need to have either a specialist qualification or undertaking a period of specialist training, no less than 6 months anywhere in the world. How to apply for a portfolio pathway. As Faye said earlier, you apply directly online via the GMC, who will then do their various checks, and then they will forward the application onto the college for us to review and evaluate. This is a really important point. We can assist with your application while you've got it open over the 24 months, or if you're thinking about it. But once you have submitted it to the GMC, you can't contact the college anymore, and you can't contact us while we're evaluating it. So it's really important that if you've got any questions or queries, to do it before you make your final application to the GMC. Next slide, please, Jo. There's a bit of a... Okay, thank you. I'm just going to briefly now talk about the specialty specific guidance. This sets out evidence the doctors will need to provide to apply histopathology. It's really important that you read the SSG in full. There is lots of helpful information as it outlines the evidence and requirements the doctor needs to submit when applying for specialist registration through the portfolio pathway. The SSG can act as a checklist of what evidence is needed to prove competence in histopathology. It also allows applicants to understand exactly what evidence is required to support their application, allowing you guys to prepare effectively. You should also read carefully the descriptors for each SIPS that's in the curriculum, and show that the evidence submitted demonstrates that your knowledge, skills and experience covers every descriptor listed. And also important to note, evidence can be used to demonstrate capabilities in several areas. For example, we suggest that a logbook can be used to demonstrate capabilities in different areas. So next slide, please, Jo. So I'll just demonstrate here. I've taken this out of the SSG. So for example, a logbook or structured portfolio of evidence. And we suggest it could potentially be used across all 11 SIPs. And as Faye said in her presentation, you don't need to submit the logbook 11 times, you just need to submit it once and reference which SIP it's relevant to. This is a suggested guide. So next slide, please, Jo. I've also done another example here. So for example, attending teaching courses, we suggest that it could meet SIP 6 and SIP 10. It is also important to note if an application is deficient in evidence in a given SIP, then it cannot be compensated by providing a large quantity of evidence in another SIP. You need to make sure your evidence covers all 11 SIPs. Next slide, please, Jo. Okay, so in addition to the SSG, we've also produced a portfolio pathway applicant template, which can be found on the college website. This allows applicants to map each piece of evidence to the relevant SIP and provide a commentary to describe how your evidence demonstrates that you've met each SIP. The applicant template should be read in conjunction with the histopathology SSG, and the histopathology curriculum. This also allows assessors to clearly understand how you intend for the evidence you submitted to be used. And it's also a really useful tool for applicants because it enables you to see if there are any areas which you still need to gather more evidence. So whilst you're doing it, you might think, oh, the leadership section, I haven't got anything there, but I know I've done a course, so I'll go find a certificate for the course. It can be a useful guide for applicants as well. We do ask doctors, if possible, if they could submit a copy of this completed portfolio pathway applicant template to the GMC along with their portfolio pathway application. Next slide, please, Jo. So I've just given you the example for what it looks like. So as you can see on the left-hand side, you list your evidence and then you tick which SIP it's relevant to. So whilst doing that, you'll be able to see, oh, there isn't much for SIP 6, or I need to gather evidence for SIP 12, and there's a bit of commentary below as well. So it's a really useful tool, and I would encourage you to complete it whilst you're making your application. Next slide, please, Jo. I thought I'd just quickly go through unsuccessful applications or poor evidence. It might be that you've met this area, but you just haven't provided the evidence to show that you've met the particular area. So one common thing we find is there is no evidence of the RCPath by examination or equivalent robust evidence of knowledge of the breadth and depth of curriculum. Another one we find is there's no evidence of competency of autopsies in the curriculum. So it's missing logbooks or reports. A few others that we come across is there's lack of evidence of competencies in surgical pathology. So there's lack of evidence of logbooks of cases showing a wide range of surgical specimens. Sometimes there's no evidence of applicants undertaking at least one audit, which should include full conclusions and recommendations as per Royal College guidance for audit. Another one is lack of evidence of management and leadership equivalent to the curriculum. So applicants should provide evidence of managing activities, for example, developing, delivering and managing high quality service, including staff management or clinical leadership. This could be supported by letters or emails from clinical directors, rotas, or something like management training course certificates. It's really the lack of breadth of evidence for generic and specialty capabilities that applications aren't always successful. And really, just to emphasise, assessors place high value on evidence that is readily identified as being personal or unique to the applicant. For example, submitting listings of test results reported by laboratory is much less persuasive than providing data relating to laboratory reports that you have been directly involved with producing or providing interpretive advice about for clinical colleagues. Next one, Jo, please. As already mentioned, how recent evidence should be. Each now will accept evidence from the last 10 years, although a small amount of older evidence can be considered where it provides a more complete account of the breadth of practice, training, experience, and achievement of curriculum outcomes. Applicants may have evidence of having achieved knowledge and skills as part of an outcome early on during their career, but not necessarily have recent evidence. Whilst applicants must be up to date in their histopathology practice at the point of their portfolio pathway application, it is accepted that applicants who have trained less recently may have progressed in their career and specialised in one or more areas. Next question, slide please. Can I apply for portfolio pathway when I'm overseas? I get this question a lot. So a lot of doctors do contact me. So it's just to reiterate, you don't need to be working in the UK to apply for a portfolio pathway application. The portfolio pathway is an alternative route for doctors who have trained outside the UK or have non-traditional career paths. So you can apply anywhere in the world. And because it's done online, you can also apply, as I said, anywhere in the world. To be awarded a portfolio pathway, applicants really must demonstrate they have the knowledge, skills and experience required for practicing as eligible specialists in the UK. Next, please, slide. These presentation will be available after the event, but we've listed some useful links to some guidance that we think will help you. So there's links to the curriculum, independent reporting for trainees, the ARCP decision aids, the RCPath guidance, and SSG. So please have a look at the links. And if you can't find any, do please contact us. Next slide, Jo. Who to contact? You need to contact the training department in the college, specifically Louis, who's the training coordinator. He oversees the administration of the portfolio pathway applications, and you can contact him at training@rcpath.org. It is really useful if you do contact the college for advice if you submit your CV. But as I said earlier, you can't contact us after you submit an application. So please contact us before. You can contact us as many times as you want. During the process. So in that 24 months, you can contact us at any point. Next slide, please. So thank you for your time and attention, and I hope you found our presentation useful today.
Thank you, Joe and Jenny. That was a really nice walkthrough of the process from the college's perspective. We've got lots of questions coming through. I'm mindful that there are still a lot of questions coming for Faye, effectively, who's no longer with us here. So there are a lot of technical questions about verification and authentication and anonymization that I think are probably not best directed towards you and Joe. So I'm not inclined to ask you those at present. And there are a lot of very specific questions about the evidence that's submitted, which I think will be best dealt with after we've heard from Claire and Sonal. So maybe there are just a couple of questions for you right now, Joe and Jenny, relating to workplace-based assessments. So there's a question about how applicants provide evidence of workplace-based assessments when not in a training program, and this is linked to another question: is it necessary to register with the LEPT system in order to undertake workplace-based assessments, or are hard copies obtainable and can they be used instead?
Yeah. Sorry, can you remind me of the first part of the question, Ronan?
So yes, it's for those doctors who are not in a training program and not registered with LEPT. Is it necessary to register in order to do workplace-based assessments, or are hard copies can they be submitted instead?
Yeah. Okay, so with regards to that point, no, you don't have to register to access the LEP system, because the hard copies of the forms for each of the different workplace-based assessments are available on the college website. So if you wanted to do them, all you would need to do is print them off from the website. If you're in a program where you're being supported, even if it's not a formal training program, but if you're in a program where you're being supported, where you've got a level of supervision, speak to your supervisor, go through what it is you're attempting to do. Hopefully you're getting some general support anyway with your portfolio pathway application. Make sure that they are aware of the workplace-based assessments that we produce at the college, what the requirements are, and if they can support you to find individuals who will undertake those workplace-based assessments with you, so that you can provide those as part of your portfolio pathway application. All you would need to do is make sure that the forms are completed. They're very straightforward. Make sure they're obviously signed and all of those things. Obviously through the LEP system, they'll be electronically verified. But you can, once they're completed, you can just add them to your portfolio pathway application.
Great, that clears that up. Thank you, Joe. And linked with that, there's another question about LEPT, and the question is: can the information in the LEPT system, if a doctor has registered and built up a LEPT portfolio of evidence, can that be linked to their GMC application in any particular way, or how is the evidence in LEPT transferred into the submission for the portfolio pathway application?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we don't have a electronic link to the GMC portal. But what you can do is, once you've got all of your evidence that you need in the LEP system, you can download it, and then you can upload that file into your GMC application through the GMC portal. So a couple of little steps, but not too onerous.
And I think finally for you, there were a couple of questions about the 3-month legal time frame, and I think this probably sits better with the GMC team than with the college team. But would either of you like to explain what that time frame is and what it relates to? Because I think it's not. I think there's maybe some misunderstanding about what it is.
Yeah, okay. Maybe I'll start, and Jenny, you can you can come in. So the only part of the portfolio pathway application that has a very specific time frame is the part of the application once is the part of the process once it comes to the college. So Jenny, could you just remind me how long generally the college has to review each application?
Have about 36 working days to return it to the GMC.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not very long. And it's fair to say, I think everybody saw the figures that Faye showed at the beginning in her presentation about the increase in applications. And it has been quite challenging for us to get through the huge increase in applications that we've seen. We have done quite a lot of work to recruit new assessors and work through them as quickly as we can. But I think it's fair to say that for quite a number of applications, we really do struggle to meet the 36-day deadline. And then we do sometimes even struggle to review them within the 3-month deadline. So we work through them all as quickly as we possibly can. And then once we have done that, we send them back to the GMC once they've gone through the full process.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Joe and Jenny. I think that that should help explain that the 3 months is not related to the time of the submission, that the submission is made to the GMC. It's just a little part of the process, because of course the whole process takes much longer than 3 months.
Absolutely, yeah. So don't the 3-month deadline is after the applicant has done all of their work. So the clock starts for the 3-month deadline on the day that the complete application arrives at the college.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of process has to go on at the GMC before it ever gets to the college. So you shouldn't assume that whenever you make your submission to the GMC and that's completed, that the 3 months has begun, because I know the GMC spent quite some time in their kind of verification process before it ever gets to colleges.
Yeah, it can take many months, can't it, Jenny, for the GMC? I mean, you could see the sort of complexity of what they do anyway in Faye's talk, but it can take many months for them to get an application, even once the applicant is happy with it, to get it to a stage where it's then ready for the college to review.
Okay, well, thank you both very much. So I'm going to move us on now to the next talk, and I'm sure Joe and Jenny will come back to you at the end if there's some more questions for you to pick up. So our next talk is from Dr. Claire Evans and Dr. Sonal Kulkarni, who are the co-chairs of the Portfolio Pathway Assessors Panel. So Claire and Sonal, between them, have oversight of all of the applications in cellular pathology specialties that come to the college for review. So no better people to give you a summary of the kind of evidence that you need and what you need to do to convince them that you've met the standard. I'll hand over to you now, Claire.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ronan. I will try and share the correct screen. Okay. So just confirm for me that you can see the presentation screen.
That is correct. I've got the right one, Claire.
Excellent. Okay. So hopefully it will move forward for me. So welcome everybody. My name is Claire Evans, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the portfolio panel with Dr. Sonal Kulkarni, and we are the two people that sign off the applications once the assessors have reviewed them. So hopefully this will work. There we are. Get the right one. Okay, so a little bit about the portfolio panel, because I think we're kind of hidden behind the scenes and no one really knows who we are and what we do. At the Royal College of Pathologists, the portfolio panel currently comprises 22 assessors. So these are currently doctors who are on the specialist register, either via the CCT route or via the CSER portfolio route. So we have a mixture of expertise, and of course within the panel we've got people who have been through the CSER portfolio process, so have that understanding of how much work is involved in undertaking this. And at the moment, we've got 2 co-chairs, as we've said, and that's partly to share the work as the number of applications increases, because we are very aware of the time constraints put in to try and get these applications assessed, reviewed, and then back to the GMC. This keeps moving. Okay, so the portfolio panel role. The role of the portfolio panel members is to review all the submitted documents in your application that has come through to the college and ensure that all the documents provided are complete. I will come on to a bit more detail in that in a second. The assessors then, as part of the process for the college, will document the evidence provided in your portfolio in the application on the GMC evaluation form, and will check it against the breadth of the 2021 curricula. The assessors will highlight if the documentary evidence that you have provided is complete or incomplete, and then the reviewed applications will then come through to either myself or Sonal at the moment to be reviewed. So if we're thinking about the actual process of reviewing, the assessors will be asked to review a particular application. The assessors must make sure that they have no knowledge of the applicant and have not worked with them previously, so that there is no possible conflict of interest. And then there is a pro forma for the portfolio assessors to complete, and all in all, they will have to review all the evidence that's provided in the application. And at the moment, most applicants are providing approximately 1,500 pages worth of documentary evidence. And I'll come into a little more detail on what people will put in their application. So it can take quite a lot of time for the assessors to go through every single page on that and cross-reference it with the curriculum, and to make sure that essentially all the capabilities in practice at the highest specialist level are completed and covered in your application. So what are we looking for? The assessors are looking for the submitted documents that demonstrate your experience and competence working in whichever histopathology specialty you're applying for. And the documents have to demonstrate that your professional capabilities are in line with the GMC approved cellular pathology curricula, whether that be histopathology, neuropathology, peds, or forensics. So a lot of the applications that people submit, and certainly for the applications that are successful and go through kind of on the first run, a long list of documents that get include a curriculum vitae, copies of exam certificates for your undergraduate and postgraduate medical training, copies of redacted reports to show that you have been reporting histopathology specimens across the breadth of the curriculum, and evidence that you are undertaking a degree of independent reporting. So we need evidence to support that you are following essentially the curriculum requirements. Reflection on your practice is very important. That is partly done by the workplace-based assessments and SLEs that you can find on the college website, but also actually taking an example of a case and how you work through it, or whether something went wrong, or whether there was a change in diagnosis, something like that shows your level of problem solving, reviewing the case, learning from that case, and how you adapted to it. It just showing, general professional competence and capabilities in how you practice. Other areas that need to be submitted, things like quality assurance, documents. So that might be external quality assurance schemes, so EQA schemes. That could be internal quality assurance within your own department. It could be review at MDT. It can be audits of practice or some part of service provision, evidence of your managerial skills and expertise. And of course, that's going to vary depending on how long you have been practicing, whether you're relatively new into independent practice, or whether you've been an established consultant in your own place of work for a long time. Evidence of teaching, any research, publications, that kind of thing. Presentations, autopsy practice. There's loads and loads of things. What I would recommend, and I'll come on to this later in the presentation, is map everything to the curriculum and the syllabus that's on the RCPath website. That gives you a clear guidance of what we are looking for. The other thing, and I think it's been hinted at in the previous talks, is how you actually structure your application and your portfolio. The more logical, the easier it is for us to assess. And in essence, if someone has said, I've put my CV in, my certificates, and now my logbook of cases, so my surgical reported cases, and I've done, say, in the past 5 years, say 1,500 cases, of which 200 were breast, 300 were GI, etc., etc. So if you break them down into specialist areas, that can also be very helpful for comparing across the curriculum and the syllabus. It makes it much more easy to pick these things out, and makes it much more straightforward for us to assess and say, yes, you've covered everything, it's great, let's go for it. Okay, I ramble on. Okay, so in essence, the bottom line of this is we're looking for a submitted portfolio that clearly demonstrates a well-rounded, competent colleague capable of working in their chosen specialty in the NHS within the professional frameworks of the GMC. So that's what we're looking for. And in essence, that's how the curriculum has been designed around the generic professional capabilities that you can, work anywhere, essentially, in the UK. So for this, to try and give you an insight into the form that we actually complete as the assessors, I've taken an example. It's been anonymized, obviously, to protect the person concerned, but it gives you an idea of what we actually enter in the assessment form for these applications. The example, because the forms obviously are quite long and you've got various capabilities in practice, I've just picked one from SIP 1 only, and it actually shows probably a little too much detail in this particular case. So this has been, if you like, slightly altered to anonymize, but also kind of a screenshot from an application. And what we get through as the assessors, what the college gets through, is a form with the capability in practice listed at the top. And then between Louis and Jenny, some information is entered into here as to what's clearly visible in your portfolio application. And then the assessors go through and add in more detail. So for this particular capability in practice, the assessor will have reported that Dr. Toxelin, and you have to forgive me for calling them Dr. Toxelin, has provided evidence to show that they fulfill the capability in practice for 1. So we put in details like the logbooks showing reporting capabilities, the degree here, reporting cases independently for over 5 years, and histopathology experience of 12 years, comments from peers that reports are of a very high standard. So review of your practice, what we describe as 360-degree appraisal, reviews. Those in your application are also extremely useful, whether they, wherever you're working. A review of practice by your peers is quite helpful and informative. We also in this one are covering a range of things for appraisal, external quality assurance, relevant CPD, each year. If you look again on the college website about continuing professional development for doctors who are already on the specialist register, there's a minimum amount of CPD activity you're expected to complete each year and a cumulative amount over 5 years. So bear that in mind as well when you put in your application. You know, what courses have you been doing? What journal clubs have you been attending or organizing? That all these things all add to your application and help provide that additional material for us to add in your assessment. Membership of professional bodies. And here we've also added in, although some of this will be mentioned again elsewhere in other SIPs in the form, we've got things about teaching, undergraduate and postgraduate teaching, supervision of trainees, the resident trainees with trimming and surgical biopsy reporting, provided examples of histology reports for applications. For histopathology, we'd want examples of histopathology reports, cytology reports, both gynae and non-gynae, and autopsy reports, all redacted, of course, but just to show your give evidence of your reporting. And for autopsies, you might consider, if you've got a coronial equivalent process, then have you attended an inquest or something like that? Can you reflect on it? Most often the people who've done placements for specialty in the UK who are doing CSER applications will also be able to provide a logbook of what they have done, and it tends to be signed off by the supervising consultant who's been looking after them. So these are just examples. And then underneath that, the assessor will also list the evidence that's been provided, and quite often the assessor will even put the pages of where those documents are to be found in the application. So some application tips for you in addition to what I've already been saying. We'd certainly recommend that you read the latest curriculum documents carefully on the RCPath website, for example, the 2021 curriculum for histopathology, and use the syllabus as a guide for the breadth of reporting experience, because the curriculum itself is directional and what the word indicative. So it is a guide, but the syllabus gives you more specific guidance on what is expected, and that includes indicative numbers of cases that you should see in an equivalent period of time. It's not an absolute fixed number, it's a guide. And then as Jenny and Joe have said, use the workplace-based assessment SLE tools that are available, and you can either do that via the college LEP system or just download the PDFs off the college website and print them out and use them that way. As I've kind of hinted at already, when you're submitting a histopathology CSER application, do make sure that you've managed to cover the stuff that's indicated specifically in the ICPT part of the curriculum, i.e. the first 2.5 years. So that will be the gynae cytology, autopsy, neuropathology, pediatric and perinatal pathology components. We understand that there is obviously a service shift and delivery across with regard to gynecological cytology and which centres are providing the service, particularly in the UK. So that we now, if you are able to get sufficient hands-on, real-time reporting in gynae cytology, that is very useful, but it might be that you're not in a situation to get that in quite the same way. So particular courses, going along to departments, to looking through, teaching sets and being supervised with that and providing evidence that you've done that is also considered as well as part of your application. These tend to be areas where people, if they haven't got those, it delays their application because we have to reject them if you can't say or provide evidence equivalent to the curriculum. I've mentioned logbooks, comprehensive logbooks of your cases, and evidence of independent reporting is, and if they're clear and logical and laid out nicely, I know it's a lot of work for you as the applicant, but it makes it much quicker for us to get it assessed and get it back to the GMC if it's nicely laid out. And then reflective notes. And this, I think, is actually capability in practice number 7, to show how you've appraised, learned, and adapted your practice in line with various cases and situations that you've come across in your practice. That's also it's a very important part of the application. We have in the past had some applicants who've sort of missed the point in what they need to provide in their logbook. If you are an international medical graduate, that you might find that your initial country of training and kind of postgraduate training have a published curriculum for the specialty, but please don't just put that as documentary evidence. You know, this is the curriculum for my country, therefore I've done it and that's it. That's not sufficient evidence by itself and will be rejected. You have to support that curriculum again with the logbook of cases and other activities that you've done to show that you have completed that curriculum as well. Otherwise, we can't sign it off. And just a note as well that the professional generic capabilities are as important as the specialty specific capabilities. I suppose we do appreciate, and I think all the panel members do fully recognise how much effort goes into completing these applications. They do take a long time, and we do appreciate how much work goes into these. It's not an easy process to go through, and it does take a long time. Our job in the portfolio panel is to facilitate the application process. And just to put it in perspective, all the RCPath portfolio panel members are volunteers. We are not paid for this role. We do it in our spare time. So we are here to help you achieve what you would like to achieve with your careers, essentially. So the more you can help us, the more the process can help you. We also have a similar process, no matter how experienced you are. All applicants have to submit a similar amount of material and documents and evidence, logbooks, etc. It's part of the robust process, it's part of the GMC requirements. So you might have been practicing 20 years or you might have been practicing independently for 2 years. You still have to provide a robust application. If you don't provide sufficient documentary evidence, the portfolio panel won't be able to recommend your application to the GMC. So please take on board review the curriculum and the syllabus documents. The other thing to highlight as well is that when we have the application through to the college, if the panel member who's reviewing your application notes that the application is missing something, is incomplete to the point where we can't sign it off, we are not allowed to contact you to request more evidence or more information. We're completely separate. So at that point, we have to reject the application, which then goes back to the GMC, and then we'll come back to you for the choice to review or appeal. So just so that you know, we have quite a fixed way that we have to handle these applications. It's either complete and successful and there's everything that we need, or it's incomplete. We need to go back and the GMC will need to come back to you to decide to review. another point as well, I think that can provide a bit of confusion. When you're going through the CSER process, you're until you receive a successful outcome from the GMC, you cannot apply for a consultant post in the UK. You have to have the CSER before you apply. And this is somewhat different to the CCT training route, where applicants in that route, provided that they've passed their Part 2 exam and have got everything else signed off, they can actually apply for a consultant post up to 6 months before they've actually had their certificate in their hands. So please bear that in mind. Don't confuse the two. The pathways are different, just so that it doesn't create any anxiety. You know where you stand. So I think those are all the hints and tips that I have for this presentation just now. And if I've missed anything, I'm sure Sonal will be able to help out.
Thanks very much, Claire. Maybe before we move on with some questions, we'll just check if Sonal wanted to add anything in particular at this point.
No, I mean, Claire have covered it very comprehensively, so I agree with her.
Okay, great. So maybe we'll look through some questions. Now, I have to advise you to brace yourselves, because we've got about 150 questions since the webinar began. Clearly, it's not going to be practical to address all of these questions, but what I hope to do is pick out some themes and common topics, and maybe ask you to kind of pick up on those and give us your advice based on your experience of looking at lots of applications. So one of the themes that strikes me most of all is that there are a lot of questions about diagnostic neuropathology and pediatric pathology. And there are a few things that come out here. There are a couple of attendees who are saying, look, we've seen that there's a separate curriculum for neuropath and pediatric pathology. Do we need to get involved with that as well if this is a histopathology application? I think you've got good news for them, Claire and Sonal, but maybe you would say that out loud.
It's just that we need to see some evidence that the candidate has experienced in these specialties. It doesn't have to be as robust as the SSG for neuropath or pediatric path.
Yeah. So those other curricula are for doctors who wish to be a consultant in peds and perinatal pathology or diagnostic neuropath, not general histopath. Okay, that's great. But just to be clear, if someone isn't able to arrange a placement, it's not essential to have a placement in these specialties. They're providing you submit evidence that gives evidence that you've met the curriculum requirements. You don't actually have to demonstrate a particular amount of time. Yeah. Is that right?
As long as it is supported by their educational supervisor in that particular specialty and verified, that should be all right.
In the curriculum, there's the one thing on the autopsies which relates to the perinatal side of it as well. So applicants should at least try and get some experience of seeing a couple of perinatal autopsies, and if and writing reflective notes on them, that can be very helpful. So yeah, it's trying to get experience, and we appreciate that it's not easy for everyone to get these placements, or but it might well be that someone has done some peds or neuropath a while ago, many moons ago, and if you're talking up to 10 years back, then that all counts in the application as well.
Yeah, because actually that was one of the questions, Claire, that was picked up. I think there are some doctors who might have done peds or neuro in the distant past, in perhaps in another country, and they're saying, well, is some evidence from a long time ago acceptable there? And I think it probably is.
Yeah, it is.
Great. Okay. So one of the themes that I've noticed is that there seems to be a bit of uncertainty about what a logbook should look like, and specifically what way the evidence should be presented in that logbook. So obviously logbooks are the kind of things that we used to have paper versions of many years ago, and they came in different formats. But I guess for me, a logbook is really just some kind of document that describes your experience and your work activity and what you've done. Could you give applicants any advice about the way you like to see a logbook structured, or what evidence you like to see within a logbook?
Well, usually the applications we receive, the logbooks contain the number of cases, the type of case, or say punch biopsy or a skin excision or some sort of a resection, and then the diagnosis. So it shows us the breadth of experience that candidate has. I think it would be easier for us to go through if they can sort it out as per specialty wise, but it's not a must. So that gives like the layout Claire was talking about earlier. If it is laid out very comprehensively and like easy to go through application, it saves time for us and in return for the applicant as well. So something which shows that the candidate has gone through varieties of subspecialties in general histopathology, and they have got enough evidence of that.
Yeah.
Claire, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, because I think quite a lot of the examples we get through in the applications, people have given a logbook detailing the number, like you say, Sonal, the number of cases and case types, whether it be punch biopsy, whatever it happens to be, in a list format. They've not given us 5-10 years list, because that's far too much information, but it just summarizes what they've done over the past couple of years and shows that they've covered the breadth of the curriculum. And if there's anything that's not in those 2 years, they can go back and then say, well, I've done this many cases 5 years ago in renal or whatever it happened to be.
Yeah, some sort of a summary at the end of the logbook would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so I suppose the logbook is going to be primary evidence that applicants might not be able to do anything about, but some summary that describes it or breaks down that experience might make it easier for an assessor to understand what evidence they're looking at. Just on the topic of sort of breadth of evidence, we've got some questions about what breadth of evidence of practice in histopathology is required. So, for example, if someone is working in a DGH, the breadth of evidence they might have in surgical pathology might not include every particular tissue type, and might be limited to the more common encounters that one would have in a DGH. Do you have any advice for applicants about how much breadth of practice is required in their submission?
Well, in the UK DGH, the specialties usually covered, as you mentioned, are the common ones: skin, breast, GI, gynae, those sort of things. What the DGH wouldn't have is the hematopathological, because those are done in a tertiary center, and again, soft tissue pathology, which is again done in a specialist center. So the candidate might have less experience in those specialties, but what we would like to see is the more wider experience in these common specialties, because this application is more assessed as for a consultant who would work in a DGH setting. Because it's no point having the entire evidence in soft tissue pathology, but they don't have any breadth in skin or other very common general specialties. So that's what we would like to have, like for all the subspecialties to have some experience, and also for the independent reporting. I saw quite a few questions about independent reporting. The candidates were asking if they need to provide evidence for every subspecialty about the independent report. It's not necessary, but what we want is the breadth of reporting and the knowledge.
Okay, so it's fair to say then that you and the assessors take a fairly sensible view of breadth. In other words, you've got to cover all of the common
yes,
tissue types, but
usually,
not
and if the candidate has worked
uncommon.
in a DGH, it is not difficult to get experience in these specialties.
Okay, that sounds very sensible, because this is also linked to another question from someone who's been working in hematopathology for more than 10 years. And their question is, well, do they need to provide evidence of much broader practice than just hematopathology?
Claire, do you want to go?
I was going to say this. You'd probably be going back further than 10 years. So you would have to dive back into your older logbooks and training and experience for that. And I know it's difficult when people have kind of super specialized in some way in that regard, but we do need to see that you have also done the other stuff in the past, which is why the kind of deadline on evidence is not absolute, because we appreciate that there are some people applying who are much more experienced. And again, we take a pragmatic approach about this as well. Every individual case is assessed on its own merits, essentially, and we map it as best we can to the curriculum requirements.
Yeah. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. I suppose the thing to keep in mind is that whenever we recommend someone for entry onto the specialist register, we're saying that they have the same capabilities as a day one consultant who's just finished training, and so that would include a certain breadth of practice as well as specialization. But what you said is really sensible advice. It's likely that the pathologists who have specialized for a long time will have done more general practice, perhaps in the distant past, and we are happy to look at evidence that's older than 10 years if it's really just to flesh out the kind of history and trajectory of someone's career. Is that a fair comment? There are some questions about teaching experience. How much weighting do you think assessors give to evidence for teaching, and what's the minimum amount of evidence that you think you need to see? Is a teaching course and a few teaching sessions maybe enough?
I mean, there is no set number for the evidence, but what we would like to say is the candidate is involved in some sort of teaching, maybe to the trainees, to their colleagues, or at any level. And the teaching course, I won't say just attending a teaching course is a good evidence. They should have done some sort of teaching actively on their own. Maybe it's within the department, locally, or at any level should be enough. Or they can also reflect on teaching what they have, if they have got any feedback from their from the other colleagues or junior trainees. That also is a good piece of evidence they can provide.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the message is that it's not, there's no expectation to have a large amount of teaching evidence, but you can't ignore it completely.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think as well, it would depend on the applicant and how experienced they are and what they've done. Because again, if you're talking about someone who's just out of training in their own country, it might be different again from someone who's much more experienced and as a university associate professor and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So they'd have different levels of experience.
Yeah, I suppose if it was me, I'd be thinking about, could I provide some evidence that I'd done some teaching and received some feedback and reflected on that?
Yeah.
But yeah, it wouldn't have to be necessarily a large volume, just enough to indicate that you have had some teaching experience and capability. Great. So one of the other topics that has come up quite a lot through our questions this morning is about the number of cases and the amount of evidence relating to independent reporting. So just thinking about the number of cases, do you have any general advice about the kind of number of biopsies you'd expect applicants to have reported? Is there a number, or
I don't think there is a particular number for independent reporting as such. It's a general number for histopathology, which should cover all the specialties. But Claire, do you have any particular?
Well, the indicative numbers for reporting in general are in the histopathology, the syllabus for each of the curricula. So that will detail, whether it's 1,500 surgical biopsies or, 500 gynae cytology, whatever it happens to be per year. With independent reporting, again, pragmatic depending on the level of experience of the person applying. We expect to see some independent reporting from everybody. But the amount again depends on how experienced the person is. So again, that's all taken into consideration, and there is guidance in the portfolio pathway part of the RCPath website about the independent reporting, and I think it's on the SAS Doctors part of the website as well. So it's not an absolute that you have to independently report absolutely everything. yeah, again, it's just showing that you've got that level of independent practice, because if you're applying to be on the specialist register, you're applying to be an independent practitioner who will be independently reporting everything. So we need to make sure that you are at that standard.
So I suppose just to give an example then, is it fair to say that we'd expect the logbook to show evidence of a large number of cases, maybe several thousand cases
Yeah, I
in
think
total?
the SSG mention is something about 4,500 or something in general
Yeah,
histopathology. It
that
doesn't
would be a
mention
typical
about the
number.
number of independent reporting, but as Claire has clearly mentioned, that it should be the breadth of reporting, because that's what is expected once they achieve this specialist registration.
Yeah, and as well as that sort of logbook that gives, just total numbers, do you like to see some examples of reports that the pathologist has actually written themselves?
Yeah, that would be very helpful. Yeah.
And do you have an idea about how many of those that you like to see, roughly?
I think those are 10 for histopath, 10 for autopsy, and 10 for cytology.
Okay, so you like to see some reports,
Yes.
in detail that have been written, and ideally, I suppose if some of those detailed reports were produced independently, that would be the kind of
Yeah,
evidence
that would
that
be
you find
a good
persuasive.
evidence. Exactly.
Okay, cool. So you'll not be surprised, there are also some questions about autopsy. And the kind of questions that we're getting about autopsy, again, I think relates to numbers. And I think that, the concerns are, is there an indicative number of autopsies that applicants need to have been involved with? Is it sufficient to have observed a number of these rather than actually actively participated and carried out the autopsy? And do you need to see many autopsy reports that the candidate has produced themselves? So, do you have any advice about the evidence submitted for autopsy?
I think the number of cases are 40 for general autopsies and 2 for perinatal autopsies. At least they should have observed some and performed some under supervision. I mean, I don't think we expect anyone to report autopsies independently, because they have not taken the exam and said they are not at that stage. So obviously it will be under supervision, but they should provide some reports where they have reported with the consultant and understand the procedure and the complexity of the case.
Yep. And I think as well, because in the curriculum, it obviously mentions the kind of medico-legal side of things that we've got here in the UK. So the coroners, or in Scotland, the Procurator Fiscal Service. So some insight or reflection into those processes can be quite helpful as well, or equivalent if you're not working in the UK. It just shows that you've looked at the curriculum, you've thought about how you can cover those requirements.
Yeah, I think the workplace-based assessments can be used very effectively for this purpose.
Great. And so it sounds like really, autopsy applicants need to demonstrate capabilities in autopsy. But it's not just about saying, I have participated in this number of autopsies. There's a bit more to it than that. The number's a bit flexible, and depending on the kind of evidence you can produce, you might consider submitting evidence about having observed some autopsies, having done some autopsies, and some autopsy reports that you were at least contributed to.
Yes.
Along with some reflection and assessments, it sounds like that would cover it, rather than just get focused on a magic number of autopsies, because I think that's the danger, that people think they have to hit this particular number, and it all feels a bit difficult at times. And just in terms of numbers, is there a number of years of experience that you think a doctor needs to have in pathology before they should make a submission? So there were a couple of questions about that, and one is about, well, for example, do you need to have 5 or 6 years? Would 3 or 4 be enough? And in terms of evidence, if you've been practicing at a fairly independent level recently, could you submit all of your evidence from a 2-year period, or do you need to show that you've been working in the specialty for much longer than that?
I don't think there is a set number, but because it is, we are comparing it to the UK training, which is a 5 or 6 years course. So you would expect roughly around the same, maybe 3 or 4 years, not exactly 5 years, but what is more important is the amount, not just the amount and the quality of the evidence the candidate is providing, and showing it through the application that they have the equivalent amount of knowledge and breadth of experience as a trainee would have at the end of 5 years.
Yeah. And I think also to bear in mind, because many of the applicants for the portfolio pathway will have done the RCPath exam. So we've done the part 1 and part 2. So again, you do need to have a kind of degree of experience, don't you, in order to pass those exams. And some of that really is literally time served and number of cases you can see. The more material you can see, the more likely you are to pass the exam first time. So yes, if you're one of these really, really super clever people that have a photographic memory, you might get through with a little less time. Yeah, but I think the majority of people have been at least 5 years. But you know, it's done on the person rather than absolutes.
Yes, I suppose since we're now focused very much on demonstrating having achieved the learning outcomes, there's less focus on the amount of time it's taken to achieve those. But I take your point, there are very, very few people who will achieve all of those outcomes in a short period of time. At the same time, I understand the question from the person who wondered, could they submit all of their evidence in the past 2 years? Because I guess if someone's been practicing at a fairly independent level, wherever they are at present, they might have covered quite a lot of volume and quite a broad range of material within that time, and it might be that all of their evidence is recent, and that should be fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the attendees this morning has asked you for a quick tip. Are there any management courses that you would recommend as being really persuasive when you see them in an application?
Claire, you want to go?
Well, I know of 2 in the UK, and again, these are not absolute or prescriptive, because some deaneries have their own management courses within their areas in the UK. So the Keele management course is one that's quite familiar to a lot of people that have been through the system, and I know NHS Education for Scotland has their own management course. They call it the LAMP course, LAMP. So there are courses around. They're fairly generic NHS management courses. Yeah, you can demonstrate management competencies in other ways as well. It doesn't. The course is not an absolute, and especially if you're an experienced person who's been running a department. We're not going to patronize the applicant by saying, yes, you now have to do one of these courses. That's not appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So courses might be part of an evidence bundle, but they're by no means essential. And yeah, I think we wouldn't want to give people the signal that they have to attend a management course, because that's probably not relevant to everyone. Okay, so there were 1 or 2 other questions about workplace-based assessments, and one that came up a few times is for doctors who have been assessed in the workplace in previous posts, can they go back to those their previous supervisors and say, could you please complete a workplace-based assessment for me? Or do you feel that these can't be done retrospectively and should only be done in real time or prospectively?
No, I think they can be done retrospectively, as long as the assessor is happy to fill in those forms and verify those documents.
Okay, so I suppose if the person who's filling in, if the assessor who's filling in the assessment form can very clearly remember you having completed this procedure, then they can easily fill that in, and that's all legitimate. That sounds sensible.
Ronan,
and I suppose,
sorry,
yeah.
Ronan, just to also say, if applicants have done different workplace-based assessments, if they've been practicing in a different country that have their own, equally they can submit those. They don't just have to submit the ones that are sort of that we use in the UK. So if they've done them in the past and they've been signed off in real time, they can easily submit those, and those would be accepted as well.
That's a really good point. So I think what we've just been discussing is more relevant for people who have not had a documented assessment from their previous post. But that's a good point, Joe. If someone has had assessments undertaken in a previous post and they've got documented evidence of that, it doesn't have to be on the Royal College assessment documentation. We'll look at evidence from their own country or wherever. That's completely fine. Thank you for that. And I think finally, are there any comments that Claire or Sonal would like to make about the FRCPath exams? Because I think there's a bit of uncertainty among some potential applicants as to whether those exams are absolutely essential or not. I know that there's some kind of chatter about exams being essential in other non-pathology specialties, and so it would be nice to get your take on the FRCPath and histopathology.
I mean, Claire has mentioned in her presentation that, or I think Jenny had mentioned that FRCPath is the main sort of a route of assessment for the Royal College to assess the eligibility criteria. And if any exam is equivalent to the level of FRCPath UK, then that would be accepted. But I think not having any exam would be a difficult situation for anyone to be even eligible to apply for this application.
Yeah, I think the exam is one of the main summative assessment tools for the curriculum. So, and the vast majority of the applicants who apply have done an FRCPath exam in a cellular pathology specialty. Some people have done postgraduate exams elsewhere that are equivalent, and that has been acceptable as well. But yeah, it is a difficult area to try and assess an application where there hasn't been some form of summative review of level of knowledge and competence in some areas of practice.
So do you think it would be fair to say that an exam of some sort is almost always required, and the easiest way to use an exam to evidence your knowledge is to use the FRCPath exam? And while some alternative exams from other countries might be acceptable, it's difficult for us to say at this point what those would be, and the burden rests very much with the applicant to demonstrate that their exam is of a similar standard to the FRCPath. So it is possible, but it's not straightforward.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also there used to be equivalents of recognition of training between the GMC and various other countries around the world, and that has changed from 20, 30 years ago. Yeah, and we don't have the same EEC recognition of training that we used to have either because of Brexit. So yeah, so we kind of use the FRCPath exam as a kind of baseline to review that kind of level of knowledge.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. I think we probably need to wind up quite soon. But I wonder whether any of the panel members would like to add any other comments, because I'm sure there might be things that have come into your head while the webinar has been ongoing. Is there anything that any of you would like to say or add for the benefit of our prospective portfolio pathway applicants?
I think much has been covered, but I would just like to insist the point Claire had mentioned at the end of her presentation, that we do not have the facility to hold on to any application. If they lack any sort of evidence, we have to reject it, and then the applicant can resubmit it. So that's a wastage of time and money for the candidate itself. So they should really make sure that they have included all the required evidence before submitting the application.
Yeah. And I think, like Jenny said, if there are any questions with regard to any potential gaps in an applicant might see, then they can speak to someone at the college to get some information, but have to do that before
the
GMC submission goes in. So it does require a bit of planning and thought, because we can't actually directly contact a candidate or applicant once the process has started.
That's good advice. So, well, thank you all very much for your hard work in presenting this morning. So Claire, Sonal, Jenny, Joe and Faye, certainly I think this has been a very comprehensive morning that's walked through a lot of aspects of the portfolio pathway. As I mentioned, there are a lot of questions have come in that we just haven't been able to deal with individually, but I suppose just to give those of you who've had questions that you feel haven't been answered, if they relate to things like verification or authentication of evidence, or anonymization, or use of non-work email addresses, or getting evidence verified by overseas verifiers who don't have sort of work email addresses, then please direct those questions to the GMC team, because they're the people who are best placed to answer those questions, because they know best their own processes for kind of ensuring that an application is together and is ready for college evaluation before it comes to us. So they'll be able to give you that advice. We will also look through the questions that we've received from you to make sure that we've covered most of the areas. And if there are some areas that we think we didn't get to and would like to kind of flesh out, we'll add some more commentary and responses to those questions whenever the webinar goes up on the website in a few weeks' time, because we realise that there are some big areas that you'd like answers to, and perhaps we'll have another similar session in the future, either for histopathology again, or perhaps for some other pathology specialties. So I'm going to wrap up there, and thank you all very much for coming. I hope you find that useful, and I wish you all the very best with your portfolio pathway applications.